All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I would very much like to thank you for listening. Um, man, it is. I have a knack, apparently, at these days of doing this after wild, wacky stuff happens over the weekend. Not without getting too much into details here, because we're here for MMA, not for world events and politics, though they do occasionally overlap. But last week I recorded this the day after there was a attempted assassination of presidential candidate and former U.S. President Donald Trump, and today I'm doing this after the apparent withdrawal of current President Joe Biden from the nomination process for the upcoming election. Um, it is it is wild over here in the States. I know I have a few of you out there who are from other parts of the world, so it's a little wild over here. Just a little bit. Little bit. Not too, nothing's like destabilized or anything, but it's a little bit, things are a little nutty. Little bit nutty. Um, so, the weirdest, very little like major MMA news has come out, but a lot of stuff is in fact happening, and I'm not here to bend your ear about that one. So just, uh, wanted to let you know a little bit again, like when I'm recording this, what's going on. And just again, thanks for listening. On the agenda this evening, we have UFC on ESPN 60 from last night. A pretty poor show on paper that in practice was. Uh, it wasn't bad, thankfully. It wasn't good. It was. Um, like bad cotton candy. There was some stuff there that was okay, that's not bad, but who cares? And it wasn't even like good cotton candy. I'm just okay. So it was there, then it wasn't, and nothing really will come of most of it. Minor exception for the main event, but that's even when these Apex shows are just utterly bereft of anything remotely interesting. The main event usually has some fringe relevance. In this case, it was, hey, whoever wins here might get the next title shot, and that's sort of dependent on what Zhang Wei Li is going to be doing next, and we're not really sure about that, so who knows? But um, I mean, the prelims, good grief. Sorry, I'll save that for the card. But that's on the event this coming Saturday. UFC 304. We're back on pay-per-view. The UFC is in. They're in Manchester for this one, right? I know they're in England. Yeah, they're in Manchester, and that's an okay pay-per-view. It's not. There's very little on the main card that's going to get you like jumping up and down. Um, but your main event is definitely has to happen. It is the champion against the deserving number one contender. However uninterested you are in that, that is a process and an architecture that should be respected. And Bilal Muhammad is without a doubt, I've been saying it for a little bit, he's the number one contender, even if I think he's not a very entertaining fighter. And he's not. Too many people try to project that onto the rest of his life, though. Like, oh, he's, deserves to be trolled and insulted online. Like, no, let's be reasonable here, people. He's not an entertaining fighter. Oh, the horror. I deal with it. So we'll preview that card. And then again, a little bit of news. Big piece of news that I should have talked about last week, but I wanted to wait for a little bit of an update, which we got this last week, but we have some fighter lawsuit update. Um, and that took a little bit of a left turn there on that one. So we'll talk about that and just, whatever else news kind of comes up. So that's what we got. Interact with the product a little bit, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, whatever's applicable to your podcast platform of choice. Y'all know the drill by now. All right, let's move on then. Wrong button. All right, UFC on ESPN 60. The only pick I changed, I swapped Algio for Choi. I got the opportunity. I found some time, really, is the way I should phrase it. I found some time, watched a couple of Algio's fights, and something about his defense did not sit well with me. So that one I switched. The rest of it, we lost one fight. We lost Brad Tavares and Jun Young Park. Some kind of a medical issue with Park after the weigh-ins. Unfortunate. I was half looking forward to that fight. Other than that, so the one shift there. Other than that, 7-4 on the event. Which ones did I get wrong that kind of bothered me? Honestly, not many. Not many of these actually kind of sit wrong with me. Usman and Peterson was just a bad fight, but uh, not a lot there. Ogden over Radzhabov. Should have given Ogden a little more respect there. His top game is very smothering, and he was out of his depth on the feet a little bit, and he got bombed on it a few points, but we'll talk about the fight when we get to it. But his ability to just kind of latch on to you when he's on top is actually, I should have given that more respect. That's on me. Don't care about getting Emil and Lee wrong. That was just stupid Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Holloway and Khrushchevsky. That was just super close. That was just super close on paper. And frankly, it was a very competitive fight. So I'm not mad about that one. What's the other one I got wrong? Hang on. That's one. So Usman and Peterson, Ogden and Razabov, Emil and Lee, and then Holloway and Khrushchevsky. Okay. So I can live with 7-4. I did not update my spreadsheet properly. And let's do that now so that I can give you the updated totals. So let's see. Another 7-4. Another 7-4. I am racking those ones up. Just eking by on the better than 50-50 thing. So that brings me to 198 and 92 on the year. Double check my math real quick. I'm going to do this again. When I do my final year-end one, I'm going to double check all my math that I've been doing week to week. So yeah, I think we're good there. Okay, so 198 and 92 on the year. 4 no contests. I'm okay with this. I'd like to be better. I really would, but a lot of these are like mindless content weeks. It's just hard to get a read on some of these guys, there's not a lot of fight footage, and that's just always. If I can't do something approximating tape study, then it's hard to feel confident in your predictions. So some of these, if I just scrape by, I'll be okay. Some of them where I know more of the participants, I should probably do better. But so that's where we are. Still doing okay. All right. As for the fights themselves, I'm gonna try real hard and make this quick because this is not worth a whole lot of discussion. Virna Jandiroba defeated Amanda Lemos in your main event, armbar 4:48 of the second round. Smart game planning from Jandiroba here. Stayed way outside of distance on the feet because she's not the striker that Lemos is, but was able to show enough feints and have enough kind of continual motion to close distance rapidly when necessary. She won the first round, I thought. Second round, a little bit more the same. A little bit more scrambly in the second round. Lemos hit a sweep in the first. Some pretty standard half guard stuff, but Jandiroba just willing to roll with her. So there was a brief leg attack in the first round. Second round, Jandiroba basically got close, got a clinch, went for kind of a lateral drop, but wound up mostly just pulling half guard. Then came up on the single leg. She does the Damian Maia. Newer fans, I shouldn't say younger, newer fans may not appreciate how much of Damian Maia's game was built around this. But if you never watched Damian Maia during like his renaissance phase, because when he first got into the UFC, he was just the jiu-jitsu whiz. But he refined his game, especially once he dropped to a welterweight. He would do this all the time. He'd get you behind the black line, close to the fence, shoot a single leg, pull half guard, not even full guard, pull half guard, without letting you establish position, wrestle up to his knees coming up on the single, and then kind of tip you over from there once you were not able to use the fence as a barrier. He did this to everybody. I think he even hit Usman with that at one point when he fought for the belt. Lost the fight, but he kind of hit that on everybody. It's at one point or another. And Jandiroba does a little bit of that. It's, the sequence in this one where she got the back, she also had a really nice back take. Goes to a body triangle, starts looking for the choke. Lemos does one of the right things trying to defend the choke. So one of the ways you defend the choke, you get a baseball bat grip on the arm, like you got a baseball bat. Then you want to take one of their arms and get it on the other side of your head. So if we're in a traditional back mount, if I grab your right arm, it's on the right side of my head, I lift it over and take it to the left side of my head. You can no longer choke me, pretty much at all. I got your shoulders going one way. It can help facilitate positional reverses. There's a lot of things for that. You can still do that when you're dealing with someone who has a body triangle. But with a body triangle, arm bars from the back, first of all, just in general, criminally underused in MMA. Because guys just really don't want to give up position. We've seen more people, if they get the back for a giant portion of a round, at the end of a round, they'll make a play for it. Which is kind of what Jandiroba did here. He had won the round pretty clearly. We got, 15 seconds left. Let me go for an armbar. Because even if I lose position, I'm not going to lose the round anymore. Glad to see that starting to make an appearance in MMA, because if you limit your offensive options from the back to just the choke, that's not all that difficult to defend. Even if you're this is a famous story in circles, and I've told it here before, actually. One of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners ever. Why am I blanking on his name? Well, certainly back in his day. Marcelo Garcia? Yeah, Marcelo Garcia. Very decorated jiu-jitsu competitor. One of the best of his era. One of the best all time in a lot of respects. Had a couple of MMA fights, and there was a coach who was talking with Eddie Bravo about it. And just said, okay, I'm going to be fighting Marcelo Garcia. Well, one, good luck, but what do I have to do? And he's going to get your back. He's a much better grappler than you. Drill back choke defense, because the gloves make it easier. And he actually did. He fended off like the whole first round with back defense, and then kind of got Garcia out of there later on in the fight, if memory serves. But that's one of the best jiu-jitsu guys ever, being stifled by that. And if all you do is try to go for that choke, maybe you'll have enough time to work your way through it, but there's not really a whole lot new in terms of how do I attack to get my arm across your neck. If there's the closest we've had to like moderate adaptations to this in MMA are the realization that, I don't need to be under the chin. If I can get across the lower portion of your jaw and just squeeze hard enough, I can compress everything back and get the same thing. That's the closest we've had to like a sort of innovation about the rear naked choke. And if that's all you've got from the back, you don't actually have a lot in MMA. The gloves just complicate things a lot. But so point there being, more guys should be looking at arm bars from the back. It's harder to get an arm bar from the back. It's a little bit less dynamic if you use a body triangle, which Janjiroba had gone to. But the thing about this is hooks are better for hip control. If you're trying to control what the other guy's doing. The body triangle is more secure, so if you're primarily concerned with maintaining position, which MMA frequently is, it's hard. It's not impossible to break a body triangle. It's harder to do. I actually think it's harder to break a body triangle in MMA. Not because of anything weird, because sometimes gi to no gi stuff, there's some weird transitions, or MMA to grappling, there's some just weird accommodations that have to be made. I think it's harder to break a body triangle in MMA because you get punched in the face. You've got to address the leverage leg, not the one across your body, but the other one. You want to get your leg under that, leverage it up, and then kind of switch your hips a little bit so the leg across your body is no longer flat across it. And if you can get one hand down there to help kind of break up the mechanical lock, that's usually the other thing you try to do, which has a little bit of danger to it because, again, you want both of your hands trying to defend, but if you can quickly address what's going on with their legs, even if they start trying to get the choke, unless they're really, really fast about it, you can address that after you've broken the very bad position. It's harder in MMA because you are constantly having to worry about being hit. When you're fighting off, choke attempts from the back, you're not just hand fighting to block the choke. You have to consider that anytime the guy on your back wants, they start swinging leather or elbows at your head. And it actually means that you can't as reliably get one of your hands down there to help this whole process out. But when you get that arm again across your head like that, you have to be, if you're doing this with someone who just has hooks, it doesn't really matter which side you go to. If you're doing it on somebody with a body triangle, you actually do have to be cognizant of which side you're going to. Because if you go to the side, if the arm you take goes to the side opposite of the one where the feet are attached, that leg across your body is basically halfway to an arm bar. You just have to bring the other one now up and around. Whereas if you go towards the side with the lock, then you can actually use one of your arms to block that other leg from coming up and around, and the other one has to make a bigger trip around or straight up and over your head, but it's easier to block. If you go to the other side, you have to be very cognizant of what your other arm is doing and how fast the other guy, the leverage leg rather than the securing leg can come around. Lemos, not quite. I think she got caught off guard by that one. I really do. And Janjiroba timed it very well. You can actually see Lemos try the Brazilian tap at one point when that armbar is locked in, and nobody buys it. So she does have to actually tap. That was kind of funny, if you know how to watch for those things. Janjiroba says she wants a title shot. I don't know who would be ahead of her at this point. Do we even have a thing for what Zhang is doing next? Let me that. Let me see what she. Yeah, we don't know exactly what's up with Zhang next. She might be. I think there's some hope or want for her and Tatiana Suarez, which, don't get me wrong, I think would be pretty darn good. But I don't know that Suarez has maintained a level of health and consistent activity enough to be really reliable if put in that spot. I don't mean that you shouldn't, make that fight. I just mean that's one of those things you have to be cognizant of. Somewhat by contrast, we have Janjiroba, who is fairly consistent. I don't think she's been too far out of competition at any given point. So if Suarez is not able to compete on the schedule the UFC wants, Jandiroba at this point, I mean, Zhang's kind of beaten everybody else. And she hasn't fought Suarez, but I think they mentioned it on the broadcast, like apart from Suarez and Jandiroba, Zhang's beaten the rest of the top of the strawweight division. Um, I don't know how much I would like Jandiroba's chances against Zhang, but Zhang's is really strong. Got good power, but Zhang's had cardio issues on occasion, and she kind of skated by in a few scenarios based on just being a good wrestler. You can't just out-wrestle Jandiroba. Her bottom game's not nearly as good as her top game, but it's still not something you can sleep on. So I would favor Zhang in that, but you gotta have the fights and you gotta reward people for winning. You know, that architecture needs to be maintained and respected, even if the outcomes aren't always what everyone wants all the time. You know? Bit of a tough loss for Lemos, but what are you going to do? Women's strawweight's just in a weird spot. Women's MMA in general right now is in a bit of a trough. It's not awful, but I don't think it's out of bounds to say when a division's in a good spot or a bad spot. And women's MMA on the whole right now is a little bit on the downside. Doesn't mean it can't or won't rebound. Probably will. But we can just be honest here, right? I'm happy to say, dude, I've been saying for years that light heavyweight's a wasteland. So this is not a boo women's MMA thing. It's a rational examination of the evidence. But that was your main event. Co-main event, Steve Garcia stops Seung-Woo Choi with punches, 136 of the first. Not a whole lot of interest there. Decent enough finishing sequence from Garcia, but a lot of the fights on the main card, we had a lot of in fact, the main card only had one decision. But this event should be one of the featured pieces of evidence when you want to talk about how a finish does not make a good fight. This was one of them. Good on Garcia. Not hating on the guy, just not much of a fight. Kurt Holloway defeated Kainan Khrushchevsky via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Close fight, very competitive. These two got after it a little bit. Some good clinch work from both guys. Nothing very high level, but I was a little surprised this wasn't fight of the night. Not too surprised when I saw what they did, but when I said they did with the bonuses ultimately, but this one, I think, might have merited some consideration. Bruno Silva defeated Cody Durden via punches, 258 of the second. I picked Silva last week, and boy, was I sweating that one. Durden had a really good first round, lots of pressure. Eventually got his wrestling going. And unfortunately for him, he didn't. Silva had showed him the uppercut a couple of times. And I don't know if Durden just felt he had a really good read on the timing or if he just stopped respecting it. Second round, he gets a takedown, and after Silva wall walks and separates, Durden comes in, changes levels right into an uppercut, knocks the mouthpiece out. Heck of a comeback. Silva was losing this, I'm not going to say dramatically, but clearly. This wasn't a, we should have stopped the fight thing. It wasn't a, what's this guy doing in there? It was, no, just Durden is winning everything. Pretty consistently. And nice comeback for Silva. And the only pick I changed, Doo-Ho Choi and Bill Algeo. Kind of felt good for the Korean Superboy. Man, I remember his initial rise. I really do. He was just the most unassuming looking guy who brought fun violence into the cage. That guy has never had a bad fight. Like, he's got one fight in the Hall of Fame. And here it was just a defense thing for Algeo that I didn't love when I watched the tape, and he slowed down Here, a lot more than usual. I shouldn't say a lot more than usual. Bit more noticeable than usual. And once that defense kind of starts not being there, he got hit with a left hook that messed up his right eye. Started it bleeding, but more than that, like he was just reacting badly when it got hit. Then missed a spinning elbow and got cracked with another left hook, and he got hit clean, took a couple of steps, reached up with his right hand to the eye, and just went, okay, we're not doing this anymore. I don't blame him one iota for that. If you've got an eye injury, your vision matters. Protect that. So good win for Choi. Okay little fight. Then in our meathead, just stupid fight. I say that with some love. Hader Emil defeated Jung Young Lee via punches 105 of the first. These two came out, squared up, and I mean that literally. Stood square to each other, cared not for defense, and just kind of swung punches until somebody fell over. Didn't last long. Emil got the stoppage. Fair enough. This fight should be an example about the importance of defense because there was none. Sometimes the best way to highlight something's importance is to remove it from the picture, and its absence speaks more than its presence would. That's kind of what happened here in the finish, especially. Just fine, and it kind of got things going. Because the prelims, which we're about to talk about, were dire. These were just a lot of nothing. Even the one that got a finish wasn't a whole lot there. So Cody Gibson defeats Brian Kelleher via arm triangle choke, 358 of the first. Yeah, I respect Kelleher. He's got a long career, but he's really pretty clearly on the downside. Good enough win for Gibson. A lot of guys trying arm triangles on this whole card, and he was the only one that got one. In fact, he actually caught it in a pretty smart way. He's in half guard. Kelleher looks for octopus guard to come up and start a scramble, move around. But as he's coming up, this is Kelleher's left arm. You got to throw that all the way over, because part of what makes octopus guard work is in this case I'll use Kelleher's left. His left arm has to come all the way like across and under Gibson's left arm. You go all the way around there. So you're coming pretty far across. And if you don't, and he couldn't quite clear the left arm. So he throws that arm up, trying to get it all the way up and over. And instead of getting all the way over, there was a little bit of a wrist pin going on the other side too. Gibson just realizes, oh, you've given me an arm triangle on the dangerous side. Because in half guard, if you're on the opposite side from the choke, you can be relatively safe. Like, you still got to know what you're doing, but unless someone has like a gorilla squeeze, you're going to be okay most of the time. Again, you can get finished from there, but it's got to be somebody with a monster squeeze, and your position, you have to not really be doing the right things with your half guard. I mean, who was it? Islam Makhachev caught somebody with one of those. I want to say it was Drew Dober when they fought. He got him with an arm triangle from half guard on the opposite side, and just you saw when he locked it in, just every muscle in that guy's back pop. Like, if you've got a horrifying squeeze, you can do it. But in general, you're going to be pretty safe. That's not the craziest. The craziest arm triangle I've ever seen finished from a position that didn't make sense. This is an older one, but Rick Story hit one. This is probably like 10 years ago at this point. Rick Story hit one from full guard. So he's on top in full guard. And he gets an arm triangle and it takes a bit, but that guy must have had a squeeze like you can't believe. If you can pull that off from full guard, that's still the craziest one I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever even really seen that hit maybe once or like occasionally will be a funky variation of it in like nogi grappling you can see. But in general, like if you're in someone's full guard, you are not hitting arm triangles. Rick Story did. Still haven't really seen that replicated. I mean, again, if you watch really low level stuff, okay. But I mean, anything approximating a good level of competition. But if you get it on the same side as your half guard, you don't really need to do much. It's not actually that hard to get enough of your weight and your body to rotate around to help add more leverage to the choke, even if their half guard's in play. So Kelleher got caught in that. Nice counter to the octopus guard attempt. Then the rest of this, again, this is pretty dire. Miranda Maverick defeats Dione Barbosa via unanimous decision, 230-27 to 29-28. Whatever. Not a good fight. Trey Ogden defeated Loic Razabov via unanimous decision, 229-28 and a 30-27. Yeah, I think was it the third round that you could make a real argument for Razabov? I think it was the third. Ogden just really lot of top pressure once he got things there. Really smothered Razabov up. Almost hit a leche de madre at one point. Interesting hearing the commentary team talk about it because Daniel Cormier has no idea what's going on. Well, that's a slight exaggeration, but doesn't really know what's going on. Whereas Laura Sanko's like, he could go for a mother's milk here, which is a neck crank / smother. It just, you don't. It's the kind of thing that you hit on the white belts, and not even like the white belts who've been there for a while, or even the people who kind of know what they're doing. If they know what they're kind of doing, but you're like the guy. You can hit it. Or if you're just doing like flow demonstrations, you'll do like, yeah, you could grab that from here, you could grab. But one of the part of the reason it didn't really develop, one, if you are a UFC fighter and you get hit with that and you give it up, you're never living that one down. You're never living down getting tapped out to mother's milk. Just never. But you also kind of want, if you can get the hands trapped, it's something you can kind of do if they reach for your hips and you're able to like capture their arms down there, then it makes that easier. But both of Razabov's arms were up, and Ogden was kind of working for an arm triangle. He spent a lot of time working for the arm triangle. Good enough win for Ogden. So give him props there. It's smothering top pressure. Getting that guy off of you must be a nightmare for most of the time. Luana Carolina defeated Lucia Pudilova via unanimous decision, 30-27 and then 29-28. I remember almost nothing about this fight. It wasn't very good. And kicking everything off, a terrible fight, Thomas Peterson defeated Muhammad Usman via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Usman just did almost nothing. Kept getting hit with punches. Did very little, and fight sucked. So that was it. Those were the fights. There was no fight of the night bonus awarded. Again, I would have given some consideration to Holloway and Krzyzewski there. Your performances went to Virna Jandiroba, Steve Garcia, Bruno Silva, and Hader Emil. I'm not gonna. I would have gone Choi over Garcia personally, but seemed to be, if you got to finish on the main card, you got a bonus. Dana White wasn't there, shock of shocks, but somebody from the UFC brass had to have gone back to the locker room area after the Gibson and Kelleher fight and just screamed bloody murder at everybody. Stop this. We need finishes. We need excitement. Don't do what's been going on. Tried to light the fire because it seemed to work again. We got some finishes, but I'm calling this, mediocre candy as a card. That's really all it was. All right, but if you want the full report, you know where to find it. MMAZone411mania.com. Go give it a read if you're so inclined. Thank y'all. I always appreciate that. That did not take long at all. Go me. Keeping to a schedule. UFC 304. This might take a little bit longer. I mean, you already know how long it takes. I don't. But yeah, this one, it might not take that long. We'll see how much I want to talk about some specific things here. So, Manchester, England, prime time in the U.S., so that poor crowd is going to be there at like 3 in the morning. I'm sure that won't lead to problems, either for transportation or just drunken disorderlies or whatever. But I don't know. There's a lot of unrest going on over in the UK at the moment anyway, so who knows? One more riot. What's the problem? Um, Sorry, I shouldn't joke about that. That's a non-trivial issue. Main event, welterweight title, rematch between Leon Edwards and Bilal Muhammad. These two fought to a no contest when it was when Edwards came back from COVID. This was March of 21. And rewatch that fight if you're so inclined to understand that Leon Edwards was really giving Bilal Muhammad the business. That was not close. That was not a close fight at all. I mean that. That was not at all close. I'm going to try not to be dismissive here, okay? Because I really don't want to be, but let me express to you why, a little bit like where my thought process is here. Leon Edwards hasn't lost since December of 2015. Okay? His 2 losses in the UFC. One, his UFC debut was a split decision loss to Claudio Silva. Good old Hannibal. I got a soft spot for that guy. I agreed with that decision, but you could argue he won. Then he wins a couple of fights, loses to Kamaru Usman, and has not lost since. He's not a prolific finisher. In fact, on his current unbeaten streak, which is, 11 fights? Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Jeez, can I do math? 13 fights. Oh, no, I know why I screwed that up. Okay. So 13 fights without a loss. There's the 1 no contest with Bilal. He's only got like 3 finishes during that time. Yeah, he choked out Albert Tumanov. That was a pretty good fight, actually. I'm still annoyed they cut Tumanov off of that one. Stopped Peter Sabata and then head kicked Kamaru Usman. But other than that, decisions. Neither of these guys are finishers, by the way, statistically speaking. But that's a long time for Leon Edwards to just be getting better and to be beating good guys. He's beaten better guys than Bilal Muhammad has. That's just a fact. Even if Colby Covington was a weird choice to have a title defense, he beat him 4-1 non-controversially. Beat Kamaru Usman twice in back-to-back fights. That's really not easy to do. The fact that was a majority decision is so weird. But, there was a point deduction, so that's kind of what played into that. Even with that, though, I thought he won. Edwards is more of a counter fighter, but he's shown he's willing to be aggressive against Muhammad because he's not all that worried about some of the offensive potency coming back. He's a good counter wrestler. Especially if things get to the fence. He's a very good fighter in the clinch, is Edwards. Great about finding spots for knees. Great about throwing elbows, especially on the break. He's fairly dexterous, so he's got fast kicks. He doesn't throw them a whole lot. He doesn't spam them, I should say. He doesn't spam them. But he's got fast kicks. He's defensively sound. He's just really, really hard to beat. Is the long and the short of that. And on the other hand, we have Bilal Muhammad, who, in fairness to him, hasn't lost since 2019 when he got beat by Jeff Neal. And since then, he has got 2 finishes. He choked out Takashi Sato, and then he did stop Sean Brady. But Muhammad's game really revolves around being the one moving forward and being able to punch enough to get into a clinch and try to out-wrestle you. That's the foundation of his game. I go forward and I force you to wrestle with me, and then I grind you out. I don't think that works against Leon Edwards because guys better than Bilal Muhammad at that game have tried it and it hasn't worked. Bilal Muhammad just fighting off the back foot is a wildly different entity than the guy when he's going forward. If you get Bilal Muhammad backing up, his offensive potency diminishes dramatically. Not to the point of like total impotence, that's a bit of an overstatement. But his reactive takedowns to you coming forward are not as strong as when he drives you into the fence. His striking when he's backing up he doesn't kick when he's backing up, which is difficult to do to begin with. I'm not trying to throw him under the bus there, but he doesn't do a whole lot of that when he's backing up. And his punching game it's not bad, but there's just such a dramatic difference if you watch his fights between when he's going forward and when he's going backwards. And Leon Edwards has already proven he can push him back. Or even if you just push into Leon Edwards, it's not like he's not very well schooled in sticking and moving. That's kind of his bread and butter. This is just a really, really tough matchup for Bilal Muhammad. Not impossible. If he's able to get Edwards on the fence and really kind of pin him there, the problem is he can't engage in a prolonged actual clinch fight with Leon Edwards because Leon Edwards has better clinch offense. He has to be able to pin him there and then try and just rinse and repeat takedowns to stall out rounds and win them via that rather than anything else. Not impossible. I think that's his main path to victory. It's not also impossible for him to hurt Edwards on the feet. He's recovered well the times he's been chinned, but it does need to be said, he's been hit in the past, and that's certainly a thing. And Bilal Muhammad doesn't have the world's greatest punching power, but neither does Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz just got a good punch in when Edwards wasn't expecting it and kind of got him a little bit wobbly at the end of that fight. If there's one other thing, I don't think cardio is going to be much of an issue for either guy. Neither guy pushes a bonkers pace. Muhammad will if he thinks you'll crack. I think that's why he fought Sean Brady the way he did. Like, before I deplete my energy reserves, I can make you give things up. That's not true of Leon Edwards. So I don't think he will try to fight that way. So I think we'll get a more measured pace out of both guys. They are both mostly measured fighters. I just don't really pick against Leon Edwards all that often nowadays. There's a few guys who I might. Respectfully, it is not at all impossible for Bilal Muhammad to win this fight. He's a good fighter. He's hard to beat. He's got good pressure in general. He knows how to win rounds, and that matters. He's just fighting a guy who nullifies a lot of his offensive options and is kind of just better in a lot of respects with the overall strategy of I do enough to win rounds, I negate some of what you do, punish you for it, and we rinse and repeat until we see again who wins enough rounds to win the fight. I don't anticipate picking against Leon Edwards for a little bit, if we're being candid, but not saying Muhammad can't win. I'm saying I feel pretty comfortable picking Leon Edwards to win. And those are not the same thing. Leon Edwards about a 2-1 favorite. That's about right, if we're being honest. That's about right, I think. It gives Bilal Muhammad the appropriate respect he's earned, but reflects what's most likely to happen. Co-main event, Tom Aspinall defending the interim heavyweight championship. This is stupid. And of course, the compound issues. John Jones had misdemeanor criminal charges filed against him. We'll see how that plays out. But the first time these two fought, I gave Blades, I forget who I picked, but I might have given Blades a fairly good chance at winning. At this point in time, I I shouldn't say there's no reason to pick Blades. Curtis Blades is a really strong wrestler. He's one of the few strong wrestlers left at heavyweight. And if he's able to get to a position where he can land strikes, his ground and pound can be pretty gnarly. He just doesn't use it a whole lot. Because ground and pound is difficult when you struggle to pass guard and the other guy's able to tie you up. Whereas Tom Aspinall, I kind of think is the best heavyweight in the world. I might not pick him to beat John in particular, but his only loss in the UFC is the knee injury when he fought Blades. Two of his losses, okay? He's only got 3 of them in his career. One of them's a DQ loss. One of them's injury. The other one he got heel hooked. And, fair enough. You don't play around with those, especially young in your career. Okay, fair enough. That's it. This guy has run over. Bear in mind, in the UFC, he has been out of the first round exactly once. He has never seen the third round in his entire career. If it's not fighting John, I don't know that I'm picking anyone at heavyweight right now to beat Tom Aspinall. That's how good he is. I have no problem picking him here. Another freak injury would be the worst thing ever, but no problem whatsoever picking Tom Aspinall to win this fight. Yeah. Okay, next up we have Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green. What a weird fight. They're trying to shine Paddy Pimblett back up. Here's the thing about that. Paddy Pimblett's striking is still not good, and his defense is very not good. And at this point, I don't know that he's going to fix those problems. I went over this before when I talked about the Jared Gordon fight and some of the issues facing Paddy and my hesitancy around them because of how many fights and how long he's been doing this. He's still a young guy. Normally, you might look at someone, he's only 29. Like, he's got time to fix those problems. Until you realize he's had 24 fights, and he's been doing this for 12 years. The number of people who can make significant alterations and improvements to their game after that point is very small. Not impossible. Small number of people have done that. The odds on this are really close. I'm very tempted to pick Bobby Green, just because it amuses me. Pimblett's striking defense is just not good. But Bobby Green, if this hits the mat, Bobby Green will be pretty thoroughly outgrappled by Paddy Pimblett. Let's be very clear about that. That is where Pimblett has the biggest advantage. I think I'm going to pick Green just for the lulz, because I don't care about this fight. Yeah, I'll pick Green and whatever. Don't care. You know what, though? Let me asterisk this one. I'm probably not going to change my mind, but I want to do a little bit of a review of the last couple of fights for both guys and maybe change my mind on that one. Other than that, flyweights, Manel Kape and Muhammad Mokaev. I've said my piece on Muhammad Mokaev a few times at this point. He's just not... There's just no offense there. It's a real problem. He started that a little bit more in terms of the ground and pound, but he struggled against Alex Perez. In fact, he's lucky that fight was 3 rounds. That was a 5-round fight. Perez had his number by the time that fight ended. Um, he's relentless. He's got good takedowns. His grappling is solid. He just doesn't have. There's no dimension to it, And then there's Manel Kopp, who is wild. Kopp's on a good run. 4 in a row. He's had some weight issues on occasion. He might not make weight, for the record. This is designed to be a showcase for Makayev against a very dangerous opponent. That's kind of the goal here. This is very winnable for Makayev. It's very winnable for him. Am I really going to buck the odds on this one and pick Kopp? Makayev doesn't react well to getting hit. He's very tough. He overcame a nasty knee bar in one of his wins. His leg was screwed up after that. So it is tough. I'm not questioning his toughness. His offensive potency is not really there. He's kind of got lucky's the wrong word because there's too much skill involved for it to be luck. But there's been a few fights where he's had some struggles that have ultimately paid off in his favor when the other guy gets a bit too comfortable scrambling with him. Yeah, I'm picking Kopp. I'm going to asterisk this one too. I need to rewatch some tape on those two guys. But at the moment, I'm actually leaning towards Kopp there. And at featherweight, good fight here, actually. Giga Chikadze and Arnold Allen. Allen, 2-fight losing streak. Now, in fairness, Max Holloway, over 5 rounds, and Movsar Evloev, oh no, right? Chikadze, 35, beat Alex Caceres. Dude, Chikadze's only loss in the UFC was to Calvin Kattar. And Allen was struggling a little bit with Kattar before Kattar's knee injury. It was a pretty good fight for as long as it lasted. This is a tough one. That's a good fight. Am I thinking Chikadze? I might be thinking... How much do we think Allen is compromised? He really hung in tough with Max Holloway, and frankly, the performance he turned in against Holloway would have beaten a lot of featherweights who aren't Max Holloway. But Max Holloway is, Max freaking Holloway, so. If Allen's able to get to the grappling, that's going to be a big deal. Yeah, I feel better about Allen in general here. Go with Allen. I don't agree with the odds here, though. The odds on this are like plus 200 on Chikadze. That's asking for trouble. I like Allen here, but having to potentially pay out 2-1 on Giga, that's a little dicey. That's all I'm saying there. So that's your main card. Perfectly serviceable pay-per-view main card. Hopefully it holds together. As I said before, there's nothing here that makes you jump up and down and go, hook it into my veins. But that's a main event that is important that it happens. A co-main event that I guess we've got to keep Aspinall busy. Green and Pimblett will probably be at least somewhat entertaining. Makayev and Kopp, it's not going to crown your next title challenger, I don't think. unless one of them completely blows the other one out of the water, you're going to need one more. You are almost certainly going to need one more win after this one. Or this one being a spectacular win and injury/timing issues for the guys ahead of you. And Allen and Chikadze, I'm not going to complain about at all. So on the prelims, we have Nathaniel Wood and Daniel Pineda. Wood at featherweight has been a mixed bag. He struggled for a while at bantamweight, eventually moved up to featherweight after a couple of years off, has gone 3-1 since moving to featherweight. Bit of a caveat here. He is still undersized, so he's not. I hate to say he's been. When I say it's been a mixed bag. And that loss to Muhammad Naimov is. It's not the end of the world because Naimov's pretty good, but I mean your best win at featherweight is either Andre Fili or Charles Jourdain, and we saw Jourdain get knocked out not too long ago, and Andre Fili is about as middle of the road as higher level middle of the road as you're gonna find. Like he's there. So bit of again, little bit up and down. Then again, Pineda 38. Jeez. Pineda's had some really. He's been out of action for a little over a year too. He was supposed to fight Hussein Yashkabov. Of course, that fell apart after Ashkabov was linked to illegal activity in Thailand. Very illegal activity, by the way. Feel free to look that up if you're so inclined. This feels like a showcase for Wood. Like some of these British guys on this card, it feels very much like not only are we going to showcase you to try and sell tickets so your name's on the poster, but like we want you to do well. This feels like a kind of a get well fight for Wood after he lost to Naimov. Strawweight, Molly McCann and Bruna Brazil. Boy, they are just propping up Molly McCann. That's where we are in 2024 in the UFC. Yeah, I hate to see it. Yeah, that's all this is. So I'll pick the beneficiary of favorable matchmaking for this fight. Heavyweight, Mick Parkin and Łukasz Brzeski. Dreszki. DRZ is different than it's Polish. Parkin is a perfectly serviceable lumbering decision machine at heavyweight, and I guess we need one of those. Another one of those. Dreszki, I don't know, is UFC quality. So going with Parkin. Okay, we have a couple of fights that they're announced, but I don't think we have the bout order for them yet. I'm going to leave them to the very end, so hang on that. Welterweight, Oban Elliott and Preston Parsons. All right, refresh my memory on these two gentlemen. You know what? Hang on. Wait, do we have bout order for this? I might be mistaken. Okay, let me put one of. I would bet money that Carolyn Loughran and Jake Hadley is in the middle portion of the so not the early prelims, but the other prelims. Let me pick that one here. The other one I'll wait till the end and throw it in wherever. But this one, I don't quite know how to feel about this one. Loughran 9-1, 1-1 in the UFC. They gave him kind of a bounce back after he didn't have a whole lot for Lapalus. Then he beat Angel Pacheco. Hadley, I think Hadley's moving up from flyweight. 10-3. What? 0-2 in the UFC. 2-3 in the UFC. Um, yeah, he's trying his hand up at bantamweight. I don't think that's gonna go very well for him. This is just a weight class issue for me, but I'll go with Loughran. Okay. So that one I'm fairly sure will be in that portion. Let me sit on the rest of that. But okay. Obon Elliott and Preston Parsons. Um, Elliott 10-2. Did he lose his UFC debut? No, he's on a 6-fight winning streak. I mean, he did, so he won his UFC debut. Oh yeah, he went the distance with Val Woodburn. I half remember that. Okay. Yeah, that you beat the guys they put in front of you. Parsons is 11-4. He's like 1-3 in the. He's 2-2 in the UFC. What one did I think he lost that he won? I kind of thought he lost that Evan Elder fight. Okay, somewhere in my head he lost that fight. I mean, he didn't, but um, that's a tough one. Parsons gets hit a lot, which is always cause for concern. But I don't know that Elliott can handle his wrestling. That's really kind of the big thing here. Oh, sure, Parsons. We'll go with the odds on this one. I don't know that I feel great about that, but that's going to be my deciding factor there. Welterweight Sam Patterson and Kiefer Crosby. What do we got here? Sam Patterson, 11-2-1, I believe 1-1 in the UFC. Yeah, he was kind of a big deal before, and then lost to Yanel Ashmuz. Yeah, they were really trying to hype him up off the Contender Series. Got a nice rebound win over Johan Lainus, so again, slowly kind of bringing him along. Crosby, 10-4, lost his UFC debut to Kevin Jousset. Jousset looks pretty good in that, actually. Has he beaten anyone of note? Maybe Alex Oliveira. Also lost to Georgi Karakhanyan. Mike Jackson, not that Mike Jackson. I kind of feel like this is Patterson. I'm pretty sure the odds are going to agree with me on this one. The odds are fairly wide on this one and do agree with me. Okay. I'm always a little bit hesitant about like minus 300 favorites in MMA, and he's like minus 350, so that's a little bit, yeah, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the pick. Middleweight, Gregory Rodriguez and Christian Leroy Duncan. Not actually a terrible fight here. I love RoboCop. Guy's only 32, looks like he's 42. He's only had 2 losses in the UFC, a split decision to Armin Petrosian that I thought he won, and then walked into a counterpunch from Bruno Ferreira. 2-fight winning streak. Currently, he's stopped both Dennis Talulin and Brad Tavares. Stopping Brad Tavares is not easy. He's not the hardest guy in the UFC to beat, but he doesn't get finished all that often. Duncan's had a little bit of a false start in the UFC. Hang on, where is he? There you are. This one is because he had a tough debut. He's 10-1. No, so he had a weird debut when Dushko Todorovic injured his knee. Then he got outstruck by Armin Petrosian for 3 rounds. Since then, he's done okay. Stoppage wins over Dennis Talulin and Claudio Ribeiro. This is a decent step up in competition for him, though. He moves fairly well, does Duncan. Got some pretty good kicks. Rodriguez is just such a tank, though, for most of the time. What are the age differences here? That might inform some of what I'm doing. 32. Rodriguez, Duncan, 28, not that big a difference. And that 4 years between 28 and 32 doesn't, there's some shift, but there's a fair amount of parity kind of across that spectrum of age. The odds are with Duncan. I'm going to buck the odds. I may regret this one. I'm going with Rodriguez. I kind of like the guy. So, if you listen to me for betting advice, don't bet on this fight. Just would be my general advice. Stay away from that one. That one's kind of designed to break your heart. Then light heavyweight, because why? Modestas Bukauskas and Marcin Prachnio. Bukauskas lost to Vitor Petrino his last time out. Won 4 fights in a row total before that, 2 of them in the UFC. I don't know, he's just kind of there, but Prachnio is also just kind of there. Both these guys lost to Vitor Petrino. Prachnio beat Devin Clark his last time out. Man, Prachnio got knocked out by Sam Alvey at one point, which is just kind of embarrassing. This is another one I wouldn't bet on, for the record. Let me go with Bukauskas, I guess. Prachnio's just been very, very underwhelming. All right, Bukauskas. That's close enough in spelling, I think. And somewhere on this card, we will have Shauna Bannon and Alice Ardeline. I don't even think we have odds for this fight. No, we don't. Okay. Sorry, here we are. Bannon lost her UFC debut, 5-1. Yeah, she lost to Bruna Brazil, that's rough. Ardeline is Romanian. Would she be the first? She's not the first Romanian fighter. Be the first Romanian woman, I believe, but not a lot of Romanians. She's also fighting out of England, so there's that. I believe this is her UFC debut. Indeed it is. She's on a decent winning streak. 2, 3. Do those count? No, those are exhibitions. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. I just don't know that Shauna Bannon's any good. Let me go with Ardeline, I guess. But no idea about that one. Absolutely no idea. So those are the predictions. It's an okay pay-per-view on paper, so hopefully it delivers. Fingers crossed. I will be covering it Saturday, per usual, in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Y'all know where to find me and that. So stop by, say hello. I always appreciate it. Okay. Let's do a couple of pieces of news, and then we will get out of here if you all don't mind. So, big news that I, again, should have talked about last week, but ultimately didn't. So we have some updates on the fighter lawsuits. I mentioned before when I talked about this last time, the UFC and the plaintiffs had reached an agreement that would be a chunk of money and some contract changes for the UFC going forward. I mentioned at the time, because there's an important caveat to all decisions. Anytime, this civil and criminal, if the two parties, the plaintiff and the defendant, or plaintiff and respondent, or prosecution and defendant, if you prefer that terminology, I don't think it matters that much. But if those two parties come to an agreement, the judge still has to agree to it. This is true of every plea bargain that takes place in criminal court. This is true of every settlement proposition in civil court. Now, the judge usually signs off. But I mentioned the judge has to sign off. Well, the judge in this case did not sign off on that agreement, on that settlement. The judge did not sign off on on another settlement when they presented that. Now, I think we're still waiting for some reasoning from the judge that needs to come out, but some of the probable indicators are things that I think are going to need to be addressed if you're going to, because now we're at two options. They go back to negotiating, come up with a better deal that the judge will sign off on, or we go to trial. Neither the UFC nor the plaintiffs really want to go to trial, it seems. But there's a few things that the judge is concerned about that if the judge is concerned, you must address their concerns. One, I think it's pretty clear that the judge views the UFC as an illegal monopoly. I don't think that's an unfair conclusion to draw for the record, but I think it's pretty clear that's where the judge's head is. So a settlement that does not address that in some meaningful way is probably not going to get signed off on. It was mentioned that the part of the settlement agreement was to join the two lawsuits together. You had the the Lee et al., so Kung Lee and lawsuit that covered a specific time period, and then the Johnson lawsuit started by Cajun Johnson that was basically from when that lawsuit ended to present day. And there's some different concerns depending on which of those two time periods and which lawsuits you're talking about. So bundling them together is not always that easy. And there seems to be some concerns about that. There's just stuff that this judge seems to want to see addressed, and still waiting on some more updates that will probably happen at some point during the week. But I feel like the UFC was ready to breathe a big old sigh of relief. We signed a fairly large check and agreed to some very minor contract. I shouldn't say minor. That's a bit. If you're running the UFC business machine, they're not the biggest contractual changes that you could have faced. So it's not nothing, but it's not earth-shattering. I think they had made sure that sunset clauses were still in effect. They couldn't go above a certain limit. Like some of the method by which Francis Ngannou exited the UFC was a path that they wanted to make sure remained open, and they had kind of come to that point. And so that remains to be seen, but I feel like the UFC was ready. Okay, fine. Big check, and we might try to pass this off as part of our lawsuit insurance, because most large corporations like that carry lawsuit insurance. So, we sign off on this. Big check, some relatively minor contractual changes in the grand scheme of things, and we can get back to business as usual. And for the plaintiffs, they were like, fine, money. And it's not like the contractual changes are nothing. I really don't mean to downplay that. Because they weren't nothing. They were far from nothing. But get money now. Get things to a slightly more workable position contract-wise. And we'll call it a day. And that is not where we are. The judge was just no. So I will try to keep you guys updated as more information on this becomes available, but something that a lot of people thought was about to be rubber stamped and in the rearview mirror is not. So that's still the old sword of Damocles hanging over the UFC's head. They've tried everything they can to avoid this in the future. It made everyone sign waivers to being parts of class action lawsuits and all kinds of other stuff. We'll have to see. We're just going to have to see how this goes. I mean, even if there's a ruling, here's part of the thing about, and apparently all indications are this would be a jury trial instead of a bench trial. But you could get nothing. If If the jury is more persuaded by the UFC's argument, then you get nothing. And part of what, gotta understand this about juries, man. Both sides get a say in who's on the jury. I don't dislike the jury system in general, but you gotta understand who gets on juries. And I say this with respect. It's not the guys at the top. It's not the best and brightest that get selected for jury. They get confirmed for jury duty, right? It's really not. It's really not. So we'll see. I mean, that being said, if you have a bunch of some of the arguments presented about this and about the unfair treatment of fighters don't require a sophisticated understanding. It's very easy to point out everything that's been said and proved about how the UFC spends money and go, they spend less than 20% revenue on fighter compensation. They include some bogus things in fighter compensation. Here's how much money they make. Here's all the different revenue streams. Here's what the fighters make. This is wrong. And here's all the ways in which the UFC is an unfair monopoly. That's actually not all that hard to sell. So which is the fear that the UFC has. If that is read by the jury as, yeah, you've screwed all these people over for a long time, here's a bunch of money. And the potential for injunctive relief, which is, the ability of the judge to impose, these wouldn't be permanent, but anyway, even if there's a verdict in favor of the plaintiffs, that's going to get appealed, and it's still going to take some time. But updates as they become available will be provided here. You all know how that works. Okay, very briefly on this next point. So last night was Jake Paul versus Mike Perry in a boxing match. Jake Paul won, TKO in the 6th round, and that basically was what it was. Mike Perry, visibly undersized. He was able to chin Jake a couple of times. And Jake Paul, when he is hit and rattled or just under pressure in general, a lot of his offense becomes very diminished. And I don't just mean on the back foot, but if you get him out of his game plan, if you get him out of what he thinks is going to happen, especially if you add some violence to it, he doesn't do what he normally does. He no longer fights to the best of his abilities. So there were a few stretches of time in that fight when Perry was able to do some of that, but he couldn't maintain it. His footwork wasn't where it needed to be. He got his face jabbed up, and he got dropped several times before the stoppage. But the interesting thing to me that came out of this actually was not that fight. I don't really care. Also on that fight, Amanda Serrano had a fight that should never have been allowed to happen. They stopped that in the part of the 2nd round, and shame on the Athletic Commission for sanctioning that. That woman had no business being in there with Amanda Serrano. None whatsoever. There was no point to that. Giant waste of everyone's time. But during part of the build-up, Mike Perry announced that he's going to be trying to get a dirty boxing promotion up and running. He talked about some of the rules that he wants to do for this. So they're going to have 5-ounce gloves, so a little bit bigger than the UFC's. They will allow elbows, and you can have ground and pound, provided you are still standing, and there's no grappling. I think there's still going to be clinching, but he's talking about stuff on the mat. So if you can stand over someone and punch them, but you can't get down there, hold them down, and hit them. It's just a little bit like the old London prize ring rules was very similar to this. In fact, if you watch old Jack Dempsey footage, because The rule about separation after a knockdown in boxing actually came about partially because of Jack Dempsey. Um, that was it was a big deal at the time, actually. If you go back to that's part of why that's some of how Gene Tunney beat him for the heavyweight title back when they fought. But it was the first $1 million gate in boxing. Actually, was Tunney and Dempsey. Um, but if you look at some of his other fights, like because you could just stand over someone while they're down, and as soon as they're no longer down, hit them again. And Dempsey would do that all the time. And that was, at the time, that was still kind of a hybrid of Marquis of Queensberry rules and London Prize rules, but boxing history. Um, this has some of the London Prize ring vibes. Really, all I want personally is boxing with elbow strikes. That's really all I want. Boxing is awesome. Boxing with elbow strikes, oh baby. I would love to watch that. I would love to see what, especially if like high-level boxers wanted to try that out, what they could do with it, because you could do some damage. But I'm down. I'm down for this. I'm down for this new iteration. So I'll half keep an eye on that. Curious to see how it comes out. The number of combat sports that are basically now part of the public consciousness and have viability because power slap is the dregs of all dregs and should not be allowed. But if you're going to sanction power slap, which is nothing but trading CTE with no skill, you have no basis to deny other MMA rule sets or other fighting style or other fighting ideas like this. So, power slap is stupid and shame on anyone that watches it, but there's a degree to which places being suckered in by the money offer of that because the UFC is like, hey, if you won't sanction power slap, the UFC won't come here. It's opened up some doors to some interesting experimentation in the combat sports space. All right, that's all I've got. Let me check Twitter. We will do, if there's nothing new, we will do plugs and get out of here. Nope, nothing new there, at least MMA related. So plugs. What do we got? Monday, statistically, when you're listening to this in the evening, over on Damn You Hollywood, we will be reviewing Twisters. That'll be a thing, I guess. If you want my other movie opinion, last week I was over on the Movies That Don't Suck and Some That Do podcast. We talked about If, which started streaming recently, and Longlegs, the horror movie starring Nicolas Cage. Well, Micah Johnson is the real star, but Nick Cage is there as well. He's the primary villain. So we talked about those over there on that podcast if you're familiar with their format. If not, go over there, give it a listen. You might enjoy it. You might not, or you might ignore all this entirely. Either way, it's entirely up to you. So I got that. Usual spate of coverage. So WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC 304 on Saturday. We are back here next week to review UFC 304 and double check. Yeah, we will preview UFC on ABC 7. Oh, minor note about UFC on ABC 7. This is in Abu Dhabi. This was supposed to feature Nick Diaz and Vicente Luque. That's not happening. Travel issues, quote unquote, for Nick Diaz. My hunch is he found out that Abu Dhabi is a completely, when I say that's not just a dry country, that's the soberest country. That's no booze, that's no drugs, that's none of that. And he kind of went, no. Something to that effect, I'm fairly sure happened. So that's being rebooked, assuming it happens at all, which is not a guarantee. The rest of that card is still pretty solid. Sandhagen and Nurmagomedov is a really good fight. Vera and Figueiredo will be good. Ferguson and Chiesa will be sad. Durden and Godinez is weird. Joel Alvarez and Alves Brenner is actually going to be... That's got some potential. And the prelims... Okay, no. Prelims are kind of bad. Solid enough main card, though. So we'll give that a preview next week. I hope to see you then. Until then, thank you all very, very much. I appreciate the heck out of you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.